Welcome to the webinar. I have a question for you. How do you measure your team's efficiency today? We all want to measure that to improve things. This economy, everything's a little bit crazy. But as we know, measuring is not the full thing. You need to improve. So many of us found DORA metrics as a useful way to measure engineering efficiency to see how well our team is delivering software at speed and with high quality. But DORA metrics has a critical failure, a weakness, if you will, and that is it measures things after they happened. If you're an engineering manager out there and you're wanting to improve your team's efficiency, you want to know when things are about to go wrong, when things are in the process of going wrong, not once they've already happened. That is the problem that we're here to talk about today and to talk about how we were going to solve it. But first, welcome to the webinar. My name is Don Brown. I am the CTO of Sleuth, and I'm going to be joined by two very interesting, exciting people. But before we do that, I just want to do a little housekeeping. If you are watching this live, we want this to be an interactive experience. I want to hear from you what is interesting, questions you have, points you want to make. So please feel free to liberally use that chat down at the bottom. And in fact, if you want something to get started, I would love to hear how many of you are measuring DORA metrics today. So please jump in the chat. Let us know if you're measuring DORA metrics today. And of course, as the webinar continues, ask questions. We love to answer questions. If you are watching this in the replay, there will be chapters down below, so you'll be able to jump to the section that you're interested in. And if you have a question or comment, please also use the comment ability down there so that we'll respond and we can start a conversation. But without further ado, I guess I should say, and so without further ado, I would like to introduce our two guests. Welcome, Daniel and Torsten. So on your right, you are gonna, which is, make sure I'm pointing, nope, right the first time. Pointing over here is Daniel. Daniel is the Director of Product Management here at Sleuth and has been the lead of this project from the product side to tackle this problem of metrics that are still in progress, this work in progress feature that we're excited to talk to you about today. So welcome, Daniel. And on my other side, we're happy to have you, is someone who I am especially excited to have. We've done webinars before, but it's usually been me and Daniel. For the very first time, we have a customer on the call. Torsten from Article, who is an engineering manager at his company, has been using Sleuth for, God, what has it been? At least a year now? What has it been, Torsten? Nice. And welcome to the show, Torsten. We are happy to have you. So we have all the right people in the room. We have technical leads, we have product managers, we have customers, we have people starting the DORA metrics journey and have started to go down that path. And we're here to talk about how we can measure that going forward. So let's get it started. But first, there was a comment about a sound check. Daniel, can we make sure that we have sound for you? We don't. Torsten, can you say something? Awesome. That's always fun when you guys can hear and then not that. It was working just fine before. Can you say something again?
Yeah, check. Here I am. check.
How about now? Okay, so thank you for letting us know about that. I swear to God, it was working just minutes ago. But what that means is everything you do live always is cursed in some way. So if we can get that curse out of the way in the beginning, the rest is going to be smooth sailing. How is that for jinxing everything? But I'm sure that's not going to be the case here. Just to check from our audience, and I have to admit, actually, this all has been a ploy to get you to chat so we can have a two-way conversation. And it worked, so we're chatting. This is great. This isn't just to watch, although you're welcome to just watch. We always love the interaction. But anyways, let's get down to why we're here. We're here to learn about how to track metrics and find problems before they're problems. And so for that, I'm going to hand things over to Daniel.
All right, thanks, Don. Well, yeah, let's just go ahead and jump right into it here then. So by way of agenda, we've got a really simple one. I'm going to do an overview of this work in progress release and show you guys a live demo. And we'll spend most of the webinar chatting to Torsten. Really curious to hear. He's been using an early release of the feature, and I know he's already gained some interesting insights. And I think he has some questions for us about what's new. So I'm really looking forward to that discussion. And then we'll make sure to leave some time at the end for all of you to do some live Q&A as well. So just really briefly, before I jump into Sleuth, just a couple slides, I promise. I want to just kind of give an overview of what does this thing do? What does it set out to do? And so at the very top level, there are 3 features that come with this release. And the first is that we're providing top level visibility into all of your work in flight, specifically in the form of PRs. And so this is new for Sleuth. As Don mentioned, Sleuth has been very deploy centric, and we've shown really powerful DORA metrics, but it's always been after the point of deploy. And so what we're doing here is giving you from within Sleuth that single pane of glass that shows you both your deploy metrics, but also the work in flight that's about to deploy. In addition to that, what I think is actually more interesting is that we're not just showing you the work in flight, but we're actually comparing and measuring that work in flight against your latest DORA metrics. And we're doing that so that we can show you if any of that work in flight is veering off track. And that's super valuable because it's work that you can still get out in front of. You can still make changes. You can break down large batches. You can tap somebody on the shoulder to try to get a review that's been lagging. And then the last piece of this is that, we recognize that not everybody's going to log into Sleuth every day, but you still want to be aware of these risks as they're emerging. And so there are notifications that come out of this feature to send to your inbox digests of any emerging risk. And so then why does this matter to all of you? We know that engineering managers love this because when it comes to that visibility and transparency into the work in progress, they're always prepared to answer stakeholder questions about what changes are going to hit what environments when, right? And that's not just production. That could be answering to a product manager like me. When will I have this change available on staging so I can put my hands on it and see if it meets the acceptance criteria? Go to market teams who might want to know when it's going to hit production so that they can see it under a feature flag. But again, when it comes to the risk identification, I think the real value behind this is that managers can start to drive those just-in-time improvements because they can respond to bottlenecks that are present right now today in the work in progress instead of looking backwards. And by responding to those, hopefully over time, they're able to drive improvements to those DORA metrics once they're kind of codified in stone. And so then if you take this release, this work in progress release, and you couple it with what we're already doing on the DORA metrics side of the house, our hope is that this adds a really powerful tactical tool to what for a long time in Sleuth has been a very strategic tool for being able to identify these systemic bottlenecks and put in improvements and see if they're having an effect. And so this is allowing you to make kind of more tactical improvements just in time, but also to see whether those longer term, more strategic improvements are actually panning out in your current work in progress. It's not just for managers, though, and we've seen this a lot internally with our own engineering team as they've been using it. I'll talk to some of the insights that we've gleaned from them, and I think Torsten has a few to share as well. But our developers have been loving this. It shows them where their own changes are starting to veer off track so that they can be proactive about correcting those issues, and even to tap their peers on the shoulder and say, hey, I noticed, you've got something that's been, waiting for review for a while. Can I pick it up? Can I help you out with it? So yeah, we've seen a lot of value even with our individual developers, and that's great because we're always striving to be the most developer-friendly engineering efficiency platform as well. So we're very excited about that. So with that, let's jump into Sleuth. Let's see this thing in action. So I'm starting here on the metrics dashboard, and for those of you who are existing Sleuth customers, you know this dashboard pretty well. I want to start by talking about 3 different use cases for kind of how and why somebody might come to look at this dashboard in the first place. Right? And so maybe the simplest of those is you've just got a curious, proactive engineering manager who on a daily basis comes into Sleuth, brings a particular project or a team into focus and navigates to the work in progress dashboard because they just want to know what's going on. It seems like I've got a little bit of a delay here on my internet connection. You guys seeing the work in progress dashboard pop up? There we go. It's coming, but it's coming very slowly. That's part of living in Costa Rica, I suppose. So this is your first peek at the dashboard, but let me talk about those other 2 use cases. So the second might be that you're in kind of a more normal traditional Sleuth flow where you're looking at metrics from the DORA metrics dashboard. Ooh, this is really being painfully slow. If this doesn't improve, Don, I'll maybe see if I can close some of the supporting stuff here for the webinar. So we're looking at DORA metrics and we're exploring some of our historical metrics. And we may see something like a bottleneck that's been captured for some of those historical deployed items. So in this case, we're looking at lead time, and I can see that, we had a bit of a spike in lead time for some of our most recently deployed changes. That may provoke me to say, well, gosh, I wonder if that bottleneck is present in our current work in progress. And so from this new widget, I can see I've got 11 items in total that are in flight. 5 of those are at risk. And from here, I can click on that link, and that's another way that I might arrive at the work in progress dashboard. The last of these would be that I might have subscribed to an email digest so that these notifications about work in progress risk are coming to my inbox on a daily basis. And so I might have arrived into work in the morning and come to find an email like this one. So, hello, Daniel, you've got 12 items in flight and 6 of those are at risk. I've got a nice breakdown here of, what are the kinds of risks that are manifesting in this current work in progress. And I've got a link that I can follow here to pop me back into that dashboard. So a few different ways that we could envision that Sleuth users would arrive at this dashboard, and for different reasons and different prompts. Once they get here, we have a nice summary view. It's kind of highlighting all the risks that have been identified across the work in progress. And then the real meat of the dashboard is down below. We've got a detailed listing showing all the PRs, draft PRs, and what in Sleuth we call future deploys that are currently in flight. Essentially, these are all items that are currently being worked on and are soon going to hit their target environments. I'll return to this and talk in a few minutes about some of the risks that we're seeing highlighted there. But before I do that, I wanted to talk about also how, just like with all other Sleuth dashboards, you can whittle down the universe of work in progress that you're looking at here. So the first way of doing that was to pull a particular project into focus, right? So all the work in progress we're seeing here is for the Sleuth application, which for us at Sleuth happens to be the only app that we're managing within Sleuth. There's also a Teams version of this, but also in the top right of this dashboard, I've got some further filters that I can use. So I might be interested in just specific code deployments within this project, or I might be interested in work in progress that's associated with specific teams that are contributing to this project. And then lastly, I can also control the look back period. This is important, this look back period, because it's really doing two things. The more obvious one is that it's determining what work in progress is actually in view, right? So I'm only seeing things that have been updated more recently than the 23rd of the month. And the reason for that is we want to be able to weed out things like zombie PRs, things that haven't been updated in a long time, because while they might be open, they're probably not really in-flight work if nobody's touched them for a long time. But the second use of this look back period is that this is also determining the universe of deployed changes that are establishing the baseline metrics that we compare the work in progress against. So I know that was a bit wordy and it's going to come up one more time here. Let me just highlight that one more time within the dashboard itself. So taking a look at the summary tile here, we can see that we've got 17 total items in progress. 7 of those are at risk. And Sleuth is telling me that those are at risk as compared to 72 changes that deployed within the same time period, right? So it's this kind of overlay of your deployed changes within that period versus your in-flight changes for the same period. We see that echoed again over on the lead time chart. So I'm seeing the work in progress displayed either as at risk or on target, but it's laid over an average. So I can always see, I have, whenever something's green, it's going to be below that average that we see in the background. For something that's red, I don't know if you can see it over the screen share, but there's a tiny little baseline and the red is just above that baseline, right? And that's why it's showing up as red. We've also got here a nice breakdown by batch size. So for all the work in flight we see below, I can see it at a glance that 15 of those are small. I've got 1 medium, 1 large that I might be concerned about, and no gigantics. And so that's good. If we return back to the summary here, I wanted to highlight one other thing, and that's the specific risk types that Sleuth is looking for here. So I can see that we're looking for anything that's got a large or gigantic batch size. I have one example of those in my work in progress. We're looking at the total lead time, and that's total lead time to this point, right? These lead time values are constantly ticking away until these things deploy. But as of today, the lead time on these items, 4 of them are already above the average. And then we break that lead time down so I can also see for any of these sub buckets, coding time, review lag time, review time, and waiting to deploy, if we're exceeding our averages with any of those. And so I can see here pretty quickly at a glance that among all my current work in progress, the biggest type of issue, the biggest risk that I have is total lead time, because I have 4 items that represent that risk. So I could click on that, and that'll actually set this filter down below to show just the items that have CLT risk. Before I clicked that, this filter was set to no filters, which is basically answering the question, what is all my work in flight? I don't care if it's at risk or what the specific risk types are. I just want to know everything that's currently in flight. And so if I choose that filter, I've got a much longer listing here. You might have noticed too that as I set those filters, the charts above are dynamic. So right now we're looking at the lead time breakdowns across all work in progress. But if I were to whittle this down to, say, just the items that have waiting to deploy risk, we'll see that that chart updates. And similarly, the batch size count's updated as well, right? So I no longer have a count of 1 under the large because the item I have in focus is a small. So that's really, I mean, from a feature functionality standpoint, that's all there is to it. We hope that this thing is just really intuitive and immediately valuable. I know that we've been getting tons of value from it again internally. I know that Torsten and his short use of it has already fallen in love with it. And so with that, I think let's open it up to a chat and hear a bit from Torsten, what he's learned, and see what kinds of questions Don might have for us.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Sure.
Sorry, Torsten, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
No,
Don.
I want to hear your thoughts. You're the man.
Well,
of
I
the
was
hour.
just gonna say the main reason why I started getting into it so heavily is when I went to any of our daily sprint reviews. Having this gave me an advantage in the fact that I now knew what to talk to them about as what things do they need to look at to try to keep us on target. So daily, I was ahead of them. I didn't have to wait for them to tell me. I could be ahead of them. And now I'm getting them to be there too. So I'm trying to put myself out of having to be in those meetings if they can manage some of that themselves.
Oh, isn't that the dream? The dream is you don't have to do anything and you just sit back and receive the accolades
Well,
of a job
yes,
done.
that's right. But what it gives me the ability to ask more of the questions around this rather than like why is this specific PR waiting so long? Is it time? Is there something else that came up? I can ask the questions around it because I know that there's possibly an issue.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah,
It
I
feels
love
like
it.
a lot of times it's about asking the right questions and probing them to kind of get at the deeper issue. Sorry, Daniel, I cut you off.
I was just going to give a little background, if you don't mind, Torsten, that the way Torsten actually arrived on this webinar is I was doing a one-on-one session with him to show him some of the new features that we had released within this kind of work in progress world. And he was just dropping quotable quote after quotable quote. And I think you said something, Torsten, along the lines of, I like to try to not get into the weeds, but with work in progress, I kind of know which are the weeds that I need to ask questions about. I thought that was great. That's largely why Torsten's here today.
Well, exactly. I don't have to ask all the questions because they can now ask those questions themselves, but I can ask the more pertinent questions around those questions.
Yep, that makes sense. Torsten, we had a question here that I wanted to ask you, and I should have done this in the beginning, but that's okay, better late than never. We have a question from Jacob who said, can you describe what led to Sleuth being a tool you wanted to use, what was missing before, and what did you gain after adding Sleuth?
Well, the original reason we added Sleuth was to find a way to figure out how to improve the efficiency of our development teams, which was how do we get really good metrics that we can use to improve efficiency. And one of the things that came from that was Google's book on DORA metrics, and then we followed back to who makes a good DORA metric monitor, and we did some work and we ended on Sleuth. And then Sleuth also was working really hard on improving the tool and helping us be better with the tool. So that pushed us further and further down the Sleuth path. And now they're adding another feature, which is one that we've been getting asked for by the development teams, which is how do I not just see what has happened, but how do I see what is happening?
Yeah, that makes sense. Lewis, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm terrible at pronunciation. I apologize. What kind of a follow-on question, I think, to Daniel's thing, which is where and what data do you collect for this dashboard?
Yeah, so this dashboard, it's driven primarily from your code repo, right? So we have native integrations with a number of them, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. And so we're pulling in PRs, draft PRs as well. There was some debate, should we show draft PRs on a work in progress dashboard? Are they real work in progress? When oftentimes, they'll never see the light of day, they'll never actually deploy, they might just be POCs or little tests that developers are running. But we decided we would include those too because it's good information. You can always weed them out. But those items may one day ship, and as they're being worked on, they're going to have contributions to your DORA metrics. So we included those as well. The last item that's in here, it's really more of a sleuth concept. But once those PRs merge, we basically put them into a container that we call a future deploy, and that gives you kind of some visibility into what your next deploy is likely going to look like. And so we'll see those future deploys listed in this listing too. You can see one of those right here. It's indicated by the little rocket ship. Now we're also looking at, it's not immediately visible from this dashboard, but as you dive into these, you can see links to linked issues. And so we're also integrating with the issue trackers. And a next phase for this is actually to pull in a lot of the issue level information so that we'll be able to see things like issue breakdowns by issue status, by issue type, by issue labels. And that'll give a little bit more of a flavor of not just the metrics associated with the PRs, but what is the nature of the work that's in flight? Is it new feature work? Is it bug fixes? Is it tech debt? That sort of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, lots of, especially the detail, because once you start have the basic idea, yeah, you do want to say, let's go beyond PRs. How are my initiatives doing? How are my epics doing? I wanted to go back to something that you said, Torsten, which was about the transition from using DORA as something that you look at every now and then and go ask the team what's going on, to starting to ask them the right questions because you're able to see work in progress, to them seeing work in progress for themselves, and you don't even have to be really involved now because they're able to ask the right questions. Could you talk a little bit about the steps you took to make that transition?
Well, we're actually just in the midst of making that transition, but we are starting to see that happening. So I've put it on one of the teams now, and they are actually asking the questions themselves that I used to ask. So now I don't have to ask the whys. I can try to concentrate on the reasons that might be causing them the issue, like up front. So they're round questions rather than the actual thing that they can actually see now for themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matt, I'm just going to go with Matt first just because he has a follow-up. How are you identifying and addressing the weeds before Sleuth?
We won't. That's part of why this is such I'm enjoying it so much, and the team is starting to really get into it as well, is because it was something that we were trying to make changes based off of the changes that we had discovered from the DORA metrics, but we weren't being able to see if we were improving until the next sprint was over to see if the lead time was decreasing. We could see it after the sprint, but not during the sprint. So we were having this 2-week lag time all the time.
Right.
And this helps us get rid of the lag time. Not completely, but because you do always have a little bit of lag time, but it allows us to now try to be much more tactical in our work rather than being tactical every 2 weeks. We can be tactical daily, or we can be tactical twice a week based on how we're progressing and what we are using as our priority for the week. So let's say some weeks we're coding, we're going to let a little bit of it slide on lead time. And then next week we're on PRs. So next week we concentrate on that side of the house. So this allows us to concentrate on whatever part of it that we need from the developer team point of view, rather than only being able to see it every 2 weeks and not making that change.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's almost like a, Daniel, I think you have a weed whacker or something going on.
Yeah, I'll mute on that.
By the way, there's this funny story with Daniel. He lost power to his house this morning. So he had to jump in a car, take all of his meetings on the phone, trying to find somewhere with power. So we're very happy that it kind of worked out. But anyways, I was going to say on Torsten, you had a really interesting thing. You talked about how instead of every 2 weeks, you're doing it every day. I mean, it almost sounds like that was the whole idea of agile, continuous deployment, these type of concepts. Take something that before you were doing every so often and now doing every day, and that you're doing a lot smaller, you're doing more smaller adjustments, and you're getting a better result in the end.
Correct. And that was the goal when we started doing the DORA metrics. They were all excited about the DORA metrics because they could make changes. But then they were like, well, I don't know if the change I made is making any difference until the next sprint is over. And then the change that we made, we can't sort of have the nice agile part only affect every 2 weeks. How do we get it more often?
Right, right. Which I think,
and that's where this tool jumped in and went, yes, this is what they wanted. So then that's where this started going, yes, this is what would help the teams be able to see this. And then I could do my part, which is try to make sure that we take away any of the things that are causing the team bottlenecks,
right,
so that the team is more efficient. And the whole point is to make the team more efficient.
right. Which I think kind of gets into Jacob's other question, which is following up on kind of how you use the value, is how are you measuring success? And it sounds like there's morale aspects to it. It sounds like there's delivery, hitting deadlines aspect to it. How do you think about it?
Well, the first one is the morale. I think the team is going to and is starting to see some of those benefits of being able to see if a change that they discovered from the last sprint is actually showing validity or not, while it's still current in their mind from the retro from the last sprint, and they can keep that in mind while they're looking at the metrics for this sprint. So it keeps them more engaged in those things, and it doesn't seem like it's a sort of stop-start thing that you sort of had when it's separated. Everything is separated by 2 weeks.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jacob, we'll do one more follow-on before we go back to Lewis, who had a great question about kind of the mechanics of how this thing works. This Plus Mini CIO initiatives are DevOps focused. What I'm hearing from you is that you're running ahead of the curve, the DevOps team. Why did efficiency become top of mind for you?
Well,
I think that's kind of like
teams,
what drove this in the first place. What was this something that decided, like, this is something I want to improve?
Yeah, I think the teams decided that. It wasn't just me. It was the team was trying to be more efficient. And how could we be more efficient? So DORA metrics were great in being able to, like the retro, come up with ideas on things that we could do. But being on that 2 week cycle meant that sometimes when they saw the next one, they didn't know why they made the change in the first place, because it was 2 weeks ago that they had the retro on the last one. So that everyone was having these context switches instead of keeping it top of mind, figuring it out, getting it done, saying, yes, this is the path, and then moving on. And you don't have to have that cognitive load of all the changes that you're trying to make throughout your development cycles that are, I mean, we run 2 week sprints, but a lot of our projects are 3-month projects. So there's a lot of cognitive load that was getting added for no big value.
Right. I want to make the point that, or call out one of the points that you made, then make sure that doesn't get lost, which was, it wasn't something that you top down decided, hey, everyone, now thou shalt do this. It was the team that kind of came up with this. And then you're really just helping facilitate the key team to achieve their goals. It was very kind of almost bottoms up. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it was sort of both. I was trying to get some data to help them, and they were trying to ask me for data so that they could see more. So we were sort of coming at it from two different sides. And we found a way to solve both of them.
Yeah, that makes sense, because we definitely hear that from people. There's like, yeah, I do want to do this top-down measurement thing, but I know if I just tell everyone we're going to measure this and you have to do it, then it's just going to fail. You have to have that interest from the bottom. So that's interesting to see that that's exactly how it turned for you. Lewis, I'm going to has a great question. Then I'm going to jump over to Daniel. So user has the flexibility of change. How does the user have the flexibility how things are measured? For example, and I think talking about kind of measuring the work in progress, I mean, some teams might use repositories like GitHub a little bit differently. And also, do you rely on a flow tool to make this happen, like Jira?
Okay, interesting. So one feature that we've looked at adding to this in a future release is the ability to tweak the thresholds that we're using, right? Because I don't think I mentioned this explicitly, but when we call one of these lead time values at risk, we actually have a 30% buffer in there, right? So it's got to be beyond 30% above your existing rolling averages before we'll flag it. And that was to reduce the noise, right? Because oftentimes things are going to be a little bit above average. And so we are looking at providing a setting where customers can specify what that threshold is. I'm not sure I fully understand the question around flow tools and Jira, apart from kind of what I mentioned that, we are looking at linked issues to these PRs, and we'll be adding some visibility within this dashboard so that you can see those issues as well as their states in terms of workflow within Jira or any of our other supported issue trackers. So Jacob, I hope that answers your question, but feel free to elaborate in the chat if not.
That one was Lewis. Yes, but I think also what you're saying, which we've heard before, which is, where are these things coming from? Clearly you're connecting into Jira, which means that only if I follow the Jira process that you have designed your tool for, do I get any meaningful output. And I think what you're saying, and of course the CTO, what I would say is that's not how it works. Sleuth tracks your activity, your commits, your pull requests, and pulls information from that, as well as using issues when you want to augment that data, but you don't have to. And that means that you can apply this to an agile flow, a scrum flow, a GitHub flow, whatever methodology you're using, you're able to still track what did I ship, when did it ship, and when did I start working on it.
That's
right. Torsten, we have another question from Jacob here. You say, would you say that visibility is opening doors to meaningful change?
Well, exactly. I think that's the goal that we're always trying to do, is if we can give the developers information that they can use to positively change their efficiency, they love that, because that means they get more time to do other things rather than trying to understand why we're making changes after the fact. When we do the retro and we're following it, why not be in front of it?
Right. Yeah, I would agree.
Isn't this the latest thing? Everything now is shift left.
That's right. Whatever it is, shift F and add shift left and add ops to it. Doesn't matter what it was. It's Scrum ops. It's something ops. Nagesh, again, apologies if I'm not pronouncing that. Wanted to go to a new question, a question asker. Curious, what was the lead time for Sleuth to get up and running in your org? What kind of pre-work standardization config had to be done to make Sleuth data meaningful, like assigned repos to projects? What was it? And this is actually something I hear a lot when we're talking potential customers is, do I need to do a bunch of work to set it all up? So what was your experience?
No, it's very, very simple to set up. And Sleuth helps with it too. Some of the things we've augmented over time to make it more specific to different teams. So we're not just following basic. We have some things that we've added because we have development teams that don't release on Fridays. So we decided that one of the things we wanted to do is put an extra, I forgot what the proper term is, but a thing that triggered to say, just because we're not releasing on Friday, we're not going to say that you're not done your work until the release goes out if it hits the Friday date. So because we don't release Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, it would wait till Monday. So we didn't want to inadvertently punish teams that finished work on Thursday, saying that they had 3 extra days of lead time when we knew that the work was done and it was ready to be deployed. So we actually created a specific one for certain teams that can't or don't release on the weekend.
And that's an important point. It's just how I'm sure it is in many of your organizations. It's definitely been ones I've worked with where just teams work different ways. I'm sure it's theoretically possible. It's almost impossible to say everyone now has to work in this way, use this methodology, have this type of approach. It's just different services, different requirements, different people. It becomes kind of a hodgepodge.
Yes. And I have 2 teams. I have a front end team and a back end team, and their work is very different.
Yep. Jacob had sorry, go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, so I mean, that was sort of one of the things that made me try to work to see if there was a way for us to change the approach slightly between the teams. so that I could still see a good view of both teams altogether, and not punish one team for having a different policy than the other team.
Yeah, that's a good
point. I think to add to that too, I think, teams have not only different processes, but often different tools. And I think that's, why for us on the product side at Sleuth, it's always a priority to continue building out our integrations list, right? You may have one team using GitLab, another using GitHub, one's using Azure, the other's using GitHub Actions. And so having those native integrations, but also being able to enable multiple of them within a single Sleuth environment and have them all play together and contribute to the same top level metrics, I think is really important when you've got different teams using different tools.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it just kind of gives you a way to kind of think about it in a more standardized way. Because, I think one could argue that actually if you tried to force every dev team to work exact same, not only do you have morale issues, but, just some people work better in some ways and some personalities and whatever configuration work better in another way. So you're really kind of freeing up the teams to do it. There was a really interesting point that Jacob mentioned. He said Sleuth is gamifying the experience the way devs relate to. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't think we've used a gamifying word today, but it's an interesting one. What is your reaction, Torsten?
Well, I think it's one of the things that we try to give them information and they use it how they want. This is not the way that we see if the team is successful. This is a way that we try to help them be more efficient. So just because you're improving your DORA metrics and you're not delivering value to the customer, we're not successful. But it does help us understand if there's things inside of the teams that I can help make a policy or make a process better to help the team be better.
Oh, that's a fascinating point you're making. So it's not that you're using DORA metrics to say team one is good, team B is bad, things like that. You're saying here's a team to help you wherever you're at to get better and to help highlight what you should be focusing on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think as you think about the economy and the layoffs and things like that, some people are coming around saying, how do I measure everyone? Elon Musk, how many commits have they done? How many lines of code have they changed? And they just want to kind of score everybody on a number, and then whoever the lowest one, fire those people and whatever. And you're saying this isn't really a tool for that. I mean, argue that's probably a bad thing in general, but even if you decided you were doing that, this is not the right tool there.
Well, and yes, I don't want, and I know my company doesn't want us to use tools to inadvertently punish one team or by gamifying, as he said, the numbers. What we want the teams to do is use information to be more efficient so that we get better value to our customer.
Interesting. So you're actually pointing out the potential negative way to view gamifying, meaning that now people are going to do whatever they need to do to make the numbers get better. And you're saying,
well, and I've seen that before, and the example that you gave was a perfect one. I had a perfect example of that just was by accident, but I would notice that one of the files moved by a line, and it showed that there was 199 lines that had changed, but only really one of them had actually changed. It just had shifted.
Yep.
Everything else, and it looked like 199 lines had been changed, which made it look like a really big commit. And I go in there and I'm like, so I'm trying to figure out what it did, and I'm like, oh, and it was an accident. But it's, there's so many ways to try to gamify things. But if the team knows that you're using it to help them, they're not incented to try to do that.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Sleuth is really, you're only going to get value from Sleuth if you're already fostering a blameless culture and a culture of autonomous self-improvement, right? If you don't have those, that cultural DNA in place, then again, I think, Sleuth's not going to be the tool for you.
Well, I think, yeah. No, go ahead, Don.
No, I was just going to say, I think that metrics can be in general that way. Anytime you put a number around it with the wrong culture, that goes terribly. With the right culture, that becomes a powerful tool.
Yeah, I was just going to say almost exactly the same thing. The numbers aren't the important part. I had this conversation yesterday about a different thing. It was about how much work we're getting done. And it was like, how are we scoring a 2 and how are we scoring a 3? And I'm like, I don't really care. How much value are we getting at the end of a sprint and how much are we putting in front of the customer? So if it's 30 or 45, the number isn't important. Are we actually delivering value on every sprint to the customer? If we are, then we're doing our job. If we're not, then how do I get you so that we can put enough into a sprint that we're showing value? And this tool, I'm hoping, and it's moving that way, continues us down the path of being more efficient so that we can put better value in front of the customer.
Right. Yep. Okay. So to be fair to Jacob, he put it in quotes because he was actually making that point as well, is that the gamifying is a potentially negative thing. Although his suggestion for some Chick-fil-A coupons for good metrics is an interesting one. As a vegetarian, I don't know if I fully support this, but you know, I guess who doesn't love some chicken other than
you?
Yeah, otherwise, what normal person doesn't love some chicken? Okay, that's great. There was one final question that we had here before we get into, I think, kind of more looking to the future. It's not really related to this, but I myself am curious what you're going to say, Torsten. You're kind of the man of the hour, as I said. Torsten, Matt was asking, as you talking about shifting left, where are your teams implementing and tracking security protocols? I think in some ways you've been showing yourself here to be someone who's a bit ahead of the curve. So we'd love to hear.
Yeah, we heard the same thing that we've been doing the last 2 or 3 companies about security. It's one of those ones that you keep adding and keep trying to shift left, right? Everything is trying to get it in as early as possible. So what information can we get and how early can we get it so that we can have meaningful changes happening throughout the development cycle?
Yeah, it's an important problem, and it's one that if you get the right balance, you do too much and then you overload developers, because developers can't do all the things at once, but the right amount of awareness really can make a big difference.
Yeah, and if they know what it is, then they can track it. And if they can track it, then they are incented to improve it, or at least maybe not incented to improve it, but at least they can see when it's going the other way.
Right. Well, Jacob,
which is just as important.
Yeah. Yep. I said Jacob's question was the last one. No, that wasn't Jacob. Sorry. That was Matt's last one. But we have a last question by Lana, which I think is such a great question. I cannot help but ask Torsten. If you face such situations, how do you explain in short, simple hold on. One more time. We'll fix that in post. How do you explain in short and simple terms to teams why we need to follow metrics like DORA, for example, or how would you explain it? So kind of, and this is a problem you hear again, like people don't understand. They think that metrics are bad. They think that now you're going to spy on them. How do you explain to people in a very simple way, no, this is actually for your benefit and it's really going to help?
Good question. Actually, I've just been documenting this to go across all the teams at Article. So it's one of the things that I think is important to understand is DORA metrics aren't ones that I came up with. Luckily, Google spent 10 years coming up with them and helping me by doing all that work for me. And what I've tried to do with the team is try to say, okay, we've got all this research that shows these metrics and the ability to change these metrics can improve efficiencies of teams. Terrific. Now, how do I use them to help the team? And I keep trying to use words to always be on the improvement side, not the tracking side. I always try to make sure that people understand these are not tracking metrics. These are metrics for improvement. And I think that's the one thing that you have to try to always put in the conversation. DORA metrics, I don't think are great metrics for tracking. They're great metrics for improvement. The tracking side of it, you probably pick different ones. These are meant specifically on how that you can take your development teams, information from what they're doing, and help them improve what they're doing in a way that they can see change. So they can make a change and see the change. Most tracking don't care about trying to make changes for improvement. They're only trying to get data, not information.
Jesus, I see what you were saying about Daniel, about him being a quote machine. I feel like I need to be writing this down
Yeah,
and
exactly.
selling it somehow.
Exactly. He's a gold mine, right?
Yeah, that's a great one.
I'd like to follow that up. I mentioned earlier when I was still doing the demo that I'd share some of these insights that we've learned at Sleuth from using the tool, and I think it's a good segue because they've been small improvements, but they've been improvements. And so, kind of the most like in the weeds tactical one, we have part of our solution is we have a Terraform provider so that you can configure Sleuth using Terraform, and we manage that code in a separate repository that's specific to that feature. And with work in progress, we were seeing that the deploy times for all those Terraform changes was really high. And this is super in the weeds, but what we discovered from that is that the webhook that repo uses to tell Sleuth that it deploys was broken. So really small thing, but we saw that was an issue, basically a technical issue in our architecture, our integrations, and fixed it. Another one was we use what's the name, Don, of the bot that we use for identifying like version drift, version changes, Dependabot. And so that thing, it actually goes so far as to create a suggested change and issue a PR for it. And we saw from work in progress that those PRs were having really high review lag time. Nobody really kind of knew why they'd been scoped in, they weren't planned. And we realized that for us, it was Disturbed's responsibility to respond to those, but it wasn't really well documented in the Disturbed role definition, nor in the training that we gave to developers who were taking on that Disturbed role. And so there again, just like really small thing, but it allowed us to improve that kind of onboarding and training process, and we resolved that issue. So, they're small wins. These are small things that we've gained from it so far, but maybe just to give a little bit more color to how some of these things have shaken out for us, and some really specific and actionable insights that we've gotten from it.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I have so enjoyed this conversation. Torsten, as I said, you are a gold mine of wisdom. I feel like you should be up on a mountain somewhere in a pose, and we kind of have to climb the mountain to get the little bits of wisdom. That was great. And I love the practicalness to it. It's not just, you should do this, you should do this. You're saying, here's what we did, here's what we didn't do. I found that really personally very interesting and very valuable. So thank you for all that. I will, before we go, and before I also go, I just want to thank Jacob and Lana. We had Matt, we had Nagesh, we had one other person, Lewis, that was also asking questions. Excellent questions. Thank you for that interactivity. But before we leave you, I want to give it over to Daniel to talk a little bit about what is coming next. So now we have the ability to track things in progress and see problems with our metrics before they happen. What's on the cards?
Yeah, so next up we have, again, we're going to be adding this deeper visibility into your issue tracker data. And that's true both for this work in progress dashboard. So we'll be able to see things like breakdowns of your issues by type, status, labels, and a listing of those issues, and maybe even some DORA metrics at the issue level, right? So what was my deploy frequency or my lead time for a given epic? But we'll also be exposing that same visibility on the metrics side. So you'll be able to see for the items that deployed, again, kind of what was the breakdown of feature work versus bug fixes versus, unplanned work, that kind of thing. But the thing that I'm really excited about, kind of the longer tail project for us, is goals and KPIs. And so this is already starting to pave the path for that. With the work in progress is giving us that upstream visibility and giving us some actionable risk alerts. But with the goals and KPIs, you'll actually be able to set goals both at the DORA metric level. So say I want to improve my lead time by 20% between now and the end of the quarter. And also for supporting goals underneath that. So, I don't want my production environment to get more than 2 days behind staging in terms of drift, or I don't want items to sit in review for longer than a day, right? So we'll be able to set goals around those things, send out notifications to team leads and individual developers when they're starting to veer away from those goals so that they can correct, and then providing that ongoing visibility over time to see whether you've been tracking toward those goals, whether you've hit the goals that you've set. So we just think that that's going to be awesome for just being able to take a little bit more control over this, right? Instead of just seeing as kind of a read-only thing, what are my metrics? You can really start to draw some lines in the sand and see whether you're tracking to those goals and make some specific improvements in order to keep things on track. So we're really excited about that too.
And probably it goes without saying, but their biggest source of what we can add next really comes from you, the customers, potential customers. What is interesting to you? What would really help you take your teams to the next level and achieve some of the things that Torsten has been talking about? Because that's what this is. This is a tool. We want to make it useful and as useful as it can for our team. I know we use it and like it, and I hope it's useful as you as well. Well, again, thank you very much, Torsten and Daniel. Torsten, it has been an absolute pleasure. We'll definitely have to have you again. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Daniel, thanks for spending the time to do all the fancy slides and the demo and all the hard work developing the feature.
Yeah, thank you, Don, for leading the show here. Thanks, guys, for joining.
Thank you, everyone. I hope to see you in our next webinar. And again, remember to let us know what you thought. If you have a thought that you didn't raise, feel free to add it as a comment to this video. This will be public. We'd love to have that conversation. And until then, good luck. I wish you luck and good Godspeed improving your team's efficiency. Bye.